Hi, I'm Rachel Abbasi. Welcome to the Recovery Daily Podcast. As always, thanks for spending time with me. Good morning, top of the morning to you. This morning I went on Facebook and a friend of mine that I used to work with posted about how it had been 11 years since her mother passed. And she said that her mother had passed sometime between May 1st and May 5th, and she had drank herself to death. And it just it just pushed me right back to my bottom, like where I was and what it felt like for me to be reaching that point of desperation. So I wanted to talk about it today. I mean, it's hard stuff when I talk about that, but it's important for me to revisit that every now and then and talk about like reaching that point of like incomprehensible demoralization, as the book, the step one says, and what it felt like, to try to express what it felt like to feel like I had created my own prison around me. Like I felt like nothing was fixable. I felt like nothing made sense. I was distraught. I was disconnected. I was exhausted. And I was unhappy. I was soul sick. I felt like I wasn't like anyone else. And I wasn't just like sad. I had this deep internal feeling of defeat. And the program, my sobriety program, translated that feeling of defeat into desperation. I felt like I was holding my breath for several years. Um, I felt like I just had chains around me, like all I could think about was alcohol. That was it. Like when I say that, I'm not exaggerating. I literally could only think about alcohol. That obsession for wanting to feel that feeling where my, it's like lack of feelings. It's like turning off every sensation. It just numbed every sensation. And I remember taking that drink in the very, very end of my drinking. I remember this one moment, and I've shared about it before, where I had been on my way to work and I made the decision like I can't do this. I can't go to work. I can't spend the day without drinking. That's what was going through my mind. I have to drink all day. I can't be interrupted by work. That's fascinating. But I remember going back down the mountain towards my house, and I thought, well, I can't go home, and I can't remember why. I guess I didn't want anybody to see my car there. I didn't want anybody to know that I didn't go to work or something like that. And I remember I had stopped on the mountain. There was a gas station up at the top of the mountain. So when I turned around in that parking lot, but I stopped and I went in and I got wine, and I was driving back home, and I stopped at the bottom of the mountain and pulled into this neighborhood, and I sorry, I just remembered it wasn't at the bottom of the mountain. It was actually in my neighborhood, but it was far away from my house. And I just parked and I poured the wine into a wine bottle that I had been using in order to get to work. And it was like a water bottle. And uh, I filled that up and I took one drink and I actually felt the chemicals rush through me that gave me that feeling of satisfaction that for another day I could escape. Um, Even though I was really surrounded by people who loved me, like I didn't have a terrible childhood. I had already been divorced. I was in love with at that time, it was my boyfriend who later became my husband. There wasn't necessarily anything wrong. I had created a cage around my mind. Um, and I was trying so hard to manage this disease that was inside of me. I didn't know at the time that it was a disease. I just felt like I was weak and I was trying to fix it. I was trying to, and I think that's so what I'm describing is my feelings that aligned with the part of the big book, which says, or the 12 and 12 for step one, where it talks about going out and trying to manage your drinking. Like, okay, well, if you think you can't stop, go back out and try to manage it. Try to just have one. And in the book, it talks about, and then the program, we talk about like that means you're just not done yet and you're going to try and reach a new bottom. For me, what it felt like, that part of my disease, it felt like I was trying to control the uncontrollable. Like I was fighting reality. I was fighting my limitations. I was fighting the emotions that went along with it. I didn't understand why my anxiety and depression medication wasn't fixing that stuff that was wrong. Um, I I just couldn't fathom a life without alcohol. And by fighting that, by trying to control the uncontrollable, I was just creating more frustration and more demoralization. And demoralization is such a perfect word because I was not me and I was becoming this valueless, purposeless shell of a person. I was becoming just a body because I was trying to erase anything beyond that, anything within that, I should say. And it was just leading me down this road of despair. Um, I went to AA. Um, I realized that I was broken and I needed to be fixed. And since I couldn't fix myself, I showed up at AA. And the first time I went into AA, I was walked in there with my hand being held by my father-in-law and my brother-in-law. Now, this is my ex-father-in-law and brother-in-law. And since then, both of them have passed in my life. But they were the first people by my side at my first AA meeting. I was terrified. And but I realized like I was accepting help. Like it was I was accepting I was accepting help. Um, and it was not immediate that I realized what was happening. It's not like I was like, okay, take me to AA, and that's the beginning of the end of my disease, you know. It took several years since then for me to admit defeat. Um, But every time I walked through the doors of AA, there was another seed that was planted. And more, drinking was no fun. Drinking was not something that I could celebrate. Drinking was something that was killing me. And I knew that at that time because before, I guess there were several or a couple years at least that passed before I went into a detox facility. And every moment was what was something I needed to reach that bottom. But I knew that I was dying because I remember looking in the mirror and whispering, "You're already dead," in the middle of the night when I was drunk and I was fighting. I was up drunk and fighting that, creating that additional frustration, feeling like a failure, you know? So the admission that I needed help was, it was a beginning, but it didn't feel like it. I think that the first glimmer of hope that I had was when I started hearing people talk about what I felt, what I was thinking. And that's why I come here and talk about it. So thank God there was somewhere for me to go. And that's what I want to do. I want to provide more opportunities for people to be led to that space where I got to have a glimmer of hope, where I felt like I was safe, where I was with people who understood me. And in the beginning, I cried every single time I shared. I never would have fathomed, once again, that I would have been able to sit here and record myself talking about these moments of desperation in my life and not cry about it. So hope really began with me hearing somebody talk about how I felt and connect that to a solution. And I realized then that I wasn't unique anymore, that they felt this too. When I heard grown ass men cry when they were talking about their desperation. And there was an individual who later in my sobriety, I can't tell you how many men I've heard um, talking out of desperation and crying. But there was this one man who I just loved it every time he would share. In the end, he would say thank you to the group for showing him the solution, and he would cry every time he said thank you. And that was different for me. I was used to people crying as they talked about the fear and the where they'd been, but this one cried out of hope, you know, and that was super inspiring to hear that. um this morning when I read about my friend grieving her mother after 11 years, I recognized that it's important for me to talk about it again and to acknowledge that there are so many people in the world that are touched by alcoholism, either being the addict or being the loved one of an addict. And it's so important for our loved ones. I know it's hard, like, because we can't get other people sober. But we can sometimes, like, you're reaching depths that you feel like you don't even have to try to allow addicts to borrow hope from you, from family, friends, from a community, like to believe when they don't believe. It makes me think of the founder of AA and his wife, Bill Wilson, and his wife, and how when he was just in the depths of his alcoholism and had no hope, she did. Like this woman, they say Bill Wilson is the founder, but I truly believe that she was the light the light that started the entire movement because she believed she was the bridge that brought her husband back to hope. And he was then able to borrow that hope from her. And I think that's where it started. I heard, I don't know, a couple months ago, somebody said the phrase "be a hope dealer," and I'd never heard of that, but I looked it up, and it sounds like it's something that has already been out there, and she was just borrowing that phrase. But that's what I like to do. That's what I want to be. I want to be a hope dealer. I want to be able to pass it on because it it reinforces my own recovery, and it supports that principle that we have to give it away in order to keep it. And hope grows when it is shared. Like this community, this sobriety community that I'm a part of, like hope is like there is a beating heart inside the hope that all of us share in the sobriety community. And when I get to see a newcomer come in and start feeling that heartbeat of the community, and turning their self-focus into connection and starting to feel like a part of, and then eventually starting to be of service and starting to contribute to that heartbeat, like transforming their suffering into their demoralization into hope. Like that demoralization turns really into liberation from what I was talking about in the beginning, from those chains that I built around myself, from the obsession. I could not think of anything but alcohol. I couldn't go to restaurants unless there was alcohol served. I couldn't go to my poor son's baseball game without filling wine in my wine bottle. Eventually, sorry, in my water bottle. And eventually, I couldn't go to work without filling wine into my water bottle and drinking it on the way to work, drinking it on the way from work, drinking it in my cubicle. Um, so to get to that point, I felt like I was on an island and nobody on the planet would understand me. I was completely isolated because I wouldn't open my mouth and share about what that felt like. And so it's so important to me to be able to put it into words and offer that that hope, that help others realize that there is freedom and strength, that we are not different, But it's hard to find that out, to figure that out without accepting help, without recognizing that we are really at the point of complete defeat. And nobody wants to admit that. It is one of the hardest things I've ever had to admit. There's two really tough times in my life where I needed to sit down and recognize that I had been completely defeated. And one was when I uh, got sober, when I finally got sober and stayed sober. And the other was after I had my stroke, and 2 years later, after I had been trying to control the uncontrollable, which was my disability, and admitting that I could not work anymore and that my life had changed forever. Those were the two times that admitting my life had was going to change forever and there was no going back, and getting honest about it, allowing someone to help, and being able to open myself up to be connected to another human being and just showing up, even though it was painful, just showing up and trusting that these other people who had walked the path before me um, could show me how to walk, could hold my hand and show me what direction to go into. But there's this real, really crucial time, this vulnerable time when we admit complete defeat, but I don't have any tools. And that's when um, that beating heart of hope within the community is so important. And and that's when the people who have walked before, when we really rely and borrow their hope and their trust. No one is too far gone. I know that now. Some people are sicker than others, but there is no past that disqualifies you from the solution. Um, I didn't find hope. I was given hope. And now I get to continue to strengthen that heartbeat of the sobriety community and pass it on. From being completely 100% defeated and soul sick to being able to share hope. Um, that's where I am today. And it's critical for me to show up every day um, in a sobriety meeting to keep that heartbeat going, to add to the energy and to borrow it so that I can pass it on. It's so important to me and I'm passionate about it, and I'm I am grateful for the difficulties in my life because I get to be of service. I get to be this bridge of hope. And that is, there's little that's more important to me than being able to offer that bridge of hope to other people who are suffering, whether it's in from their alcoholism or in stroke recovery or vestibular recovery. Like, it's hard stuff. And playing a role in someone else's recovery is really critical for me. So thanks for showing up and allowing me to do that for you and for myself. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time.